Hey, this is Brian Wright, the coach, here with Coach's Corner on May 19th, 2026, a Tuesday. And I'm still talking about MVP. The clips from past stuff is hitting. People are taking their sides and the conversation continues to go on. I'm wondering why I'm so pissed. What bothered me so much? And then I'm thinking about it. And really what it comes down to is that I really do feel for the fighters. You can get mad at me for whatever I said about Ronda Rousey or Nate Diaz or any of these people. But when I see matchups like that, I get very frustrated. MVP was a one-sided affair where the matchmakers clearly were curating a card to make sure that there were a lot of knockouts, that they delivered for what they thought the fans would want, and for sure what the overlords at Netflix wanted, which is they wanted the idea of entertainment, whatever. So they take this whole nostalgia thing, they sell that, we get names we haven't seen in a very, very long time, allow them to get back out there. But the biggest issue I have with this is that the predatory nature of MMA is being overlooked, and then it turns into the fan base, I hate the UFC, I love everything not UFC, or I love UFC, I hate everything not UFC. And, Nate's the man, and, Gina Carano is amazing, and Ronda sucks or doesn't suck, whatever. These are all superficial arguments that we have on the internet and that the fan base at large has. But the thing that I'm really looking at, and this is just my experience talking, is the predatory nature of MMA and the promoters, from the UFC to MVP and everybody in between. The problem that we run into is that fighters, for the most part, it's the nature of fighting. You don't have a consistent job. You never know which fight's going to be your last. You're always trying to cash the next check because you never know where the next one's coming from. And since the Reebok deal occurred in the UFC, that golden era of sponsorship disappeared. Fighters used to get, say, $5,000 in a debut loss for the UFC, but they would get $10,000 to $15,000 from a Tap Out, a Silver Star casting company, an Affliction, somebody, because there were no uniforms. There was none of that stuff. But all that had to change. The UFC had to consolidate. There's reasons behind that. That's a whole nother conversation. Say they suck, they screwed everybody over, whatever. But fighter pay did go up as they consolidated that, not for the lower level and mid-level to the same degree as the high level, but you do make life-changing money at the high level in the UFC now. You have to survive the low and mid-level. But I'm digressing a little bit. The issue here is really the manipulation tactics that get guys like JDS back into the octagon or the hexagon. Fighters don't have that consistent pay. They don't have a 9 to 5 kind of thing. They're chasing the big paycheck or the big moment that's going to lead to a bigger paycheck. And they've got people around them that they want the big moment too. Your coach is getting a percentage of what you make, so of course they want you to fight. Your manager gets a percentage of what you make, so of course they want you to fight. The organizations make a ton of money off of your name, so of course they want you to fight. The problem is that it's not always a good idea for the fighter to take these fights, and that's where the manipulations come into play. People feed into the insecurities, and they make things that are really detrimental agreements look like the greatest thing they've seen. Who sold JDS that Despain was a good idea? I mean, JDS had a great low kick, knocked him down with those low kicks, but Despain basically didn't care about him. He just kind of kept waiting in, and was just looking for the big shot, which he knew he was going to land. Same thing with Ngannou. Ngannou looked like he didn't even care about his opponent. Mike Perry was laughing at times while he was dismantling Nate. Ronda was clearly just doing what Ronda does, and she knew, I'm going to take her down and I'm going to get her. This was by design again. And so you have a half of the card that maybe they knew what was coming, or maybe they didn't. They looked at the money. They looked at the possibility of this new thing that's going to catapult them on Netflix. But it's just a bad idea that only benefited certain people. And this is where the celebrity boxing model is just so dangerous when you're dealing with a talent pool of real names and real athletes. Having, say, Anderson Silva box Jake Paul, that's different. Those were big gloves, only punches in a ring, one guy a name, one guy an influencer that's developed some skills, not the most dangerous environment. The dangerous environment is when you have a guy like Francis Ngannou who can kill somebody with a punch being put in with a guy who's not really prepared for it. This is someone at maybe a little bit past their peak, but still close enough to their peak to be considered one of the best in the world against a person that was a washout at 205. So yeah, chasing that money bag is not the way to go. Chasing the bag has become kind of this meme culture attitude that a lot of managers and shows and fighters talk about. But the reality of chasing that bag in today's environment is pretty damn dangerous. The UFC is just as manipulative as, say, MVP is at times with money and offers. This is not, me shitting on everything that's not UFC. The reality of it is with the UFC is you will get a call from a matchmaker or an executive in the organization that'll say, hey, if you don't want to take this fight, let's just ride out your contract and then we'll evaluate your relationship. What they're saying to you is we're going to just pay your contract and we're threatening to not sign you again. They say, no, we were just saying like, hey, maybe we're not on the same page. Maybe we have to fight some fights to figure that out. Yeah, really cool. But we know what's being done. Fighters get pressed all the time. And then a lot of these guys have managers in the middle that don't really manage. They just sell the UFC's idea back to their athletes so they can become, maintain their favorite status as a manager. Your manager is supposed to have a little bit of a rocky relationship with the promoter because they're supposed to be pushing for your best interests. That doesn't happen all the time. A lot of managers are best friends with the corporate structure and they just pitch really bad ideas to their fighters because it's volume and long-term for them, not your short-term window health needs. So yeah, it is a horribly predatory environment. And I think what bothered me so much about the MVP card was just that it just so blatantly exposed the predatory nature on a large format in front of a massive audience. And we saw a lot of people get messed up for what was not life-changing money. The tens of millions of dollars everybody was supposed to be getting paid according to the internet is just not what happened. So yeah, the hangover still exists. The show was still bad. It was not just bad on the optics. It was bad on the execution, and it executed along an old playbook with a new gift wrapping around it. So that's why I'm so pissed, I believe. But yeah, I'm going to let this go. I don't want to talk about it anymore. It's Tuesday. Tomorrow, I want to talk about other things, about fights coming up, about the White House card, about how the UFC is stuck a little bit because they've got so many of their champs booked and they've got so many shows coming up. And yes, we have the White House card, but we also have a developing International Fight Week, which is going to have Max and Conor 2, which it's a little bit past its needed time, but I still think that's a great fight. I'm very interested in that one, but we can talk about that more later. Today was all about the last of the negative hangover from MVP and all these people. One last thing I'll throw. If you look up Nikisa Badarian, you'll realize he was the CFO for the UFC during the Zuffa years. And he was one of the architects behind the deal that created Endeavor and which gave us the UFC as we have it today. So the guy that is presenting himself as the savior and the leader of the revolution is actually the architect of what he's now pretending he's fighting against. So this is a true insider acting the way he always has, but pretending he's something else. So do your homework, look into him, and you'll find out that is the truth. All right, this is Brian Wright, the coach. I'm just going to breathe. I'm going to let MVP go, and we're going to move on. Peace.